Thanks for joining us this morning. This is the Aurora Health Alliance Kids Interest Group meeting. My name's Joe Glaviano. I'm the program coordinator with Aurora Health Alliance. And thanks for being here today. We're going to start with Rachel Walker with Developmental Pathways. And Rachel, I will let you take it away, and you should be able to share your screen if you need to.
Rachel Walker, I'm the Community Partnerships Manager here at Developmental Pathways. I'm here to really talk about our children's services today. As we go through, welcome questions in the chat. Please help me, Joe, just manage the chat. I'm not always able to see it pop up when it gets going. And we'll kind of go quickly because there's a lot of programs to cover today. And I want to make sure that you just get kind of that base information as we get going. So what I hope you walk away with today is just a general understanding of the programs available at Developmental Pathways for Children, how to refer them, and then, just the options that you could pursue if you're working with a child or family that has young children that there might be some developmental concerns for. This is just a quick overview of what we're going to go over today. So we'll talk Developmental Pathways as a general organization and then jump into our children's specific services. I'll make space at the end for questions. I do want to be respectful of our other presenter too. So if we need to move like offline for other questions or specific questions that you have my information in the chat. Okay, so let's talk about Developmental Pathways. So Developmental Pathways is a nonprofit organization that provides services to those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I will refer to that as IDD from here on out, just because that's a little shorter acronym. There are 20 of these organizations in the state of Colorado, and the term that these organizations go by is Community Center Board. It really depends on where you live. That's where you get assigned to your Community Center Board. So Developmental Pathways serves Arapahoe County, Douglas County, Elbert County, and City of Aurora, which bridges a little bit into Adams County. So anyone on this call will likely be working with someone in one of those catchment areas. If you're not in one of those areas, no big deal. We'll just refer you to one of our sister organizations that provides the exact same services. So here is the definition of an IDD, and I'll point out just a couple things on here because it's really important to know who we're serving, just the general criteria of the people who qualify for our services. So an IDD is defined as a condition that occurs before the age of 22. So a lot of folks might assume an IDD is something you're born with, but that's not always the case. It can happen all the way up to age 22. So it could be a condition that has that sudden onset or maybe ongoing onset into adulthood, even young adulthood. It's a IDD condition. So that is typically something like cerebral palsy or Down syndrome are kind of the most common ones that are known, but there's a whole list of conditions that could qualify under IDD. With that condition, we're looking at IQ or adaptive testing scores under the score of 70. We use a confidence interval with that, so there's some wiggle room with that test score, but that's the general criteria. So you usually have to have that IDD condition plus one of those test scores. Does not have to be both. But I will point out we also accept neurological conditions too. So if someone you're working with has ADHD, let's say, so that's a neurological condition, and they have an adaptive score below 70, they could qualify for our services. It's a pretty big distinction because I think most folks just think of that IQ score as everything, but really we can focus on adaptive scoring. This would play out also with a child with autism. So we know a lot of children with autism have typical IQ scores or maybe even higher IQ scores, but they're adaptive scoring. So their scoring of their daily living activities is scoring low. They need a lot of help to get through daily living activities. If that's the case, they could qualify for services. The other way to qualify for services, if you're a child under the age of 5, you will qualify on delay alone. So that's also important if you're working with a child anywhere from newborn to age 5, that they don't have to go through that IQ or adaptive testing criteria. We're looking at their developmental delay in that situation. So the first program we're going to talk about is early intervention. This is a program that's available for babies and toddlers 0 to 3 years old. We'll have a little snapshot on this next one, just giving you a lay of the land with early intervention. This program is really available for families that have developmental concerns. So if you're working with anyone that's like, oh man, my kid is not developing like, Susie in class, or I think they should be walking or talking by now, those would be great referrals to these programs. There's also a way to be categorically eligible for the program. So if you have an automatic diagnosis like autism, like Down syndrome, even low birth weight, there's hundreds of qualifying diagnoses that would automatically make you eligible for this program. We really want to see anyone that may have concerns about developmental concerns. There's no harm in just making a referral, getting that child evaluated, and then potentially getting them services if they qualify. Just like any program at Developmental Pathways, this is no cost to families. So that rings true for every program that we'll talk about from here on out. Like I said, all referrals are welcome, even if it's like, this is borderline or we're not quite sure, go ahead and make the referral. Services are offered in what we call the natural environment. So that's anywhere the child exists on a regular basis. Typically that's home, but that could be daycare, that could be grandma's house, that could be the park down the street. It's really anywhere they are in a natural environment. This is also a family-driven program. Most of our programs are family-driven, meaning the family really gets to dictate what works for them, and they know their lifestyle and what their concerns or priorities are. So they get to really declare what services look like and how to pursue them. This is a path for early intervention. I know a lot of people on this call might be familiar with early intervention, so I will call out some of the major changes that are happening to this program, just so you're aware. The first one's happening right now. So starting in May, the state of Colorado is taking over intake entirely. Intake used to come to the organization directly. Now it's going to go to the state. And I apologize, I don't have the new state information because I think that just happened yesterday. So if you want and you need the new contact intake information, please just reach out to me and I will hunt that down for you. Once they make it through intake, they're assigned a service coordinator. That person is the person who's guiding them through the program in and out. All programs at Developmental Pathways has a service coordinator or case manager type role. So just so you're aware, there's always someone on the other end of the phone that a family can call. Evaluations are changing. Who does the evaluations is typically done by Child Find. A lot of you are familiar with Child Find, but that's all changing come July 2022. I do not know who the contracts are going to land with yet. That's still up in the air, but starting in just a couple of months, the persons who do the evaluation will change. Once they make it through the evaluation, and even if you're eligible categorically for an evaluation, there's still going to be an evaluation just to look at what the specific skills are for that child. Once they make it through the evaluation, there's a service plan. We talk about therapy in that service plan, so specific types of therapy. The most common ones are PT, OT, and speech, but we also have a whole other menu of behaviorists, of sleep therapists, nutritionists. There's just a whole menu of other services that are offered through early intervention. And then at 3, they transition out. We don't leave them high and dry. We transition them to another program if they're eligible for. There's another change coming to early intervention called Part C extension, so that children with summer birthdays would be able to access Part C services through the summer, knowing that they generally go into that Part B, that special education service, starting in the fall when the school district resumes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a program that a lot of children from early intervention would transition into. We call this program the Community Outreach Waitlist Services Program, but from here on out, I'll call it Community Outreach because the other term is just so long. This program is available for children over the age of 3. Like I said, this might be a natural segue for children that are transitioning from early intervention, but it might be for children that you're working with that are like, hey, we have concerns. They didn't make it through EI, they're too old, but we still want them to access services. This would be a great program. This program is county funded, which means that our counties gave us no levy, those property tax driven funds to operate this program. Because it's county funded, it's very specific to Developmental Pathways. So if you're working with one of our sister organizations, they might not have a program like this. They might have a program that's similar, might be named something different, but just know that this specific program is unique to Developmental Pathways. This program is very simple to enroll into. It's just kind of a quick enrollment form. We're just determining if they meet those base requirements. And then after that, they get assigned a coordinator, just like they would in early intervention, to really call and ask questions to and ask for that navigation. They also get connected with funding. That's probably the biggest component of this program. And funding is really to look at unmet needs, things that the family needs, but don't have access through another program. Any program at Developmental Pathways will have to be related to the child's development. So unmet needs does not mean rent, clothing, food, that sort of thing. Those are specific, typical parenting costs, and we're not able to fund those. But unmet needs related to the child's development could look like things like respite care, which we know is a prime need for anyone that's supporting a child with developmental needs. It also might look like assistive technology, therapeutic rec class, sibling support. A lot of things could fall under that unmet needs category. The extras in this program that are really available to any family is that we have a newsletter that comes out every other week. Anyone on this call could sign up for the newsletter. It's just packed full of the latest and greatest resources, new providers that we found, upcoming events. We also host events for our families routinely. So we've done a huge holiday outreach. We used to do sensory friendly events before the pandemic. We're kind of bridging back into that now. We also offer discounted programs. So we call these scholarships. So we'll have programs around town that we have identified as, really significant pillars for services for families, but are not funded another way. So example of this would be adaptive swim safety. That's not funded through Medicaid or anything like that typically, especially for this age group. So we'll fund the majority of the service, and then the family's responsible for a small amount. If the family cannot pay that small amount, they can come back to Developmental Pathways and ask us to cover the rest. Also in that discounted programs, that might look like social skills groups. Hippotherapy falls under that as well. So there's lots of great scholarship programs available. To be eligible for this program is just kind of our standard eligibility across the board. You have to live in one of our areas. You have to have a delay under the age of 5 or a disability over the age of 5, and not currently be served on a Medicaid waiver. And that's really because a Medicaid waiver is so comprehensive that this program would pale kind of in comparison to a Medicaid waiver. This program is amazing, especially for families that don't qualify for a waiver, but the waiver is so comprehensive, it really should cover the majority of the family's needs. This family support program is the next that we're going to talk about, typically for the age over the age of 3. Not always though, sometimes 0 to 3 can access these services. That's why it says typically. Family support is a state funded program. So we're going a little up in that kind of funding accountability. So we started at the county level, now we're going to the state level. Anytime that we have a little bit more oversight with funding, it needs a little bit more paperwork. So just bear that in mind as we move through the rest of the programs. This program will look similar to community outreach, meaning that there you get a coordinator, you get connected to funding. All services are individualized. You're to qualify based on delay or disability and residence. The one criteria that's a little different in this program is that there's a wait list prioritized based on family need. So the family will need to fill out what we call a most in need form, and then how they fill that out will move them up and down the wait list. I like to point out to families that this is not the time to be the hero when you're filling out these forms. It's really time to be honest and reflective on what their daily needs are, and not to diminish, the amount of care that they're providing for the child or the individual that they're supporting. There is no prediction on how long a family could wait for a family support service spot. If they are waiting, they can move on to community outreach while they're waiting. So there's always an option for those families to get support that they need while they're waiting on another program. I will point out, this is the only children's program that has a wait list. Family support services. So these are the common family support services. I'll call out the couple that everyone is really interested in, which includes respite care. It's probably number 1 across the board, and then assistive technology. But you can see that there's a whole list of other services that they could access in family support. I'm 99% sure the slide deck came out to you guys. So if you need to look at this list again, I'm hoping that the slide deck is available to you so you can just take a look. What's nice about this program is that there's a family support council, and that family support council really informs the parameters of this program. That council is made out of individuals and services, their families, other stakeholders. It's a really nice resource for this program to rely on to guide them. We're going to jump into what would be maybe a more complicated topic, which is Medicaid waivers. I am not certain on the knowledge base for Medicaid waivers, so I'll give you my little elevator pitch that I give everyone when we talk about Medicaid, that you can qualify for Medicaid based on income or based on disability. We're going to be talking about the disability route today. So just know that this looks a little different from state general plan. There's some benefits, and anyone that qualifies based on disability is given all the benefits of state general plan, but this is a different way to qualify for Medicaid based on disability, based on that developmental need. There are two Medicaid waivers that are offered by Developmental Pathways for Children. There are 4 total in the state of Colorado. So just know this is not an exhaustive list. If you're working with someone with a child with a developmental disability, that there could be 2 other waivers they could potentially qualify for. These are the specific ones to IDD. So the other ones might have a more medical lens to them. These are the ones that are really specific to IDD, but not end of the road. And certainly there's no wrong door. Anyone can give us a call that potentially could be eligible for a Medicaid waiver. We'll take their story, we'll digest it and let them know which waivers they're eligible for, even if it's not through us. And then the family can make the decision on which one they want to choose. But these are the 2 that are offered at Developmental Pathways. Also important to note that there's 10 Medicaid waivers in the state of Colorado, 4 for children and 6 are for adults. So if you're working with someone that's bridging on that 17, 18 age group, that there's other waivers that we could talk about. We're not going to do it today because we're limited on time. And the lens for this group is really children's, but we can talk about, if you want to give me a call or send me an email, we can talk about adult waivers if you need that information. The 2 that are offered through Developmental Pathways are known as Children's Extensive Support, or CES. I will call it from CES from here on out, or Children's Habilitation Residential Program. We also call this one CHIRP. So CES and CHIRP is kind of what I'll refer to them from here on out. So waiver eligibility. So to be eligible for a Medicaid waiver, they're really looking at 3 criteria. That financial criteria is not the same as state general plan, where you qualify based on income. We're really looking at the individual's assets. In terms of state general plan, I am 99% sure that they look at the household income. So this is a different way for you to qualify for Medicaid. There's ways for a Medicaid waiver to shelter children's assets or individuals' assets, which is also different than general Medicaid. So that's just good for you to know. If there's a lot of assets in that children's name, you can transfer that to a specific fund or a specific account that would not be held against them for their financial eligibility for a Medicaid waiver. Financial should never be the holdup for a family to start the conversation about a Medicaid waiver. That shouldn't be something that weighs heavy on them. They should just apply because there are ways to kind of shelter those assets. Level of care. Level of care, meaning this is defined by the state of Colorado. To be eligible for a Medicaid waiver, we're looking at intermediate level of care. And so we do a little assessment to look at the level of care needed for this individual. And it's kind of looking at their daily living activities impact and taking all that information. I like to tell people intermediate level of care means that that person needs interventions throughout the day to be successful. That would be kind of the criteria I would keep in the back of my head. Really, children that have significant developmental needs, we don't really need to worry about level of care. They're likely going to be eligible. Targeting criteria. So we're looking at that disability determination, like we talked about, to make sure that they meet all the general criteria for disability definition. So before the age of 22, the IQ or adaptive score, the neurological or disability condition. But we're also looking at specific things within the waiver that are identified as eligibility criteria. And we'll go through that as we talk about each waiver. So the first one is CES. This is for children under the age 18. This is some of the targeting criteria that we're talking about. So for children's waivers, there's an age requirement, as you would imagine. These children need medical or behavioral interventions throughout the day. And it's considered line of sight. So children during the day that qualify for this waiver need supervision or interventions every 2 hours during the day and every 3 hours at night. So that means that children who are sleeping through the night may not qualify for this waiver. However, if they need interventions throughout the night, so if they have a medical condition that requires some sort of medical intervention, that could qualify them for this waiver. Huge benefit to this waiver that there's no wait list. So anyone that has significant enough needs to qualify for CES is not waiting to get into supports and services. There is a bit of an elaborate intake and enrollment process. So I would keep expectations realistic, that they're not going to call and get services tomorrow. It could be several months because the intake and enrollment process can take a while. So just letting your families know that they want to start on this sooner than later because it could take them a little bit to get through intake and enrollment. These are the services available to CES. So I pointed out earlier that anyone on a Medicaid waiver already gets the general plan benefits, which is huge. So those would be PT/OT speech for children. It could be behavior services for children. So these are in addition to their state general plan Medicaid benefits. These are the additional services. I sometimes will explain to families, even though it's not a direct correlation, that waiver almost means extra benefits, bonus services for them. Point out the top ones, probably respite. Community connector means that they're going to take out the individual and really support them in an inclusive environment. Therapeutic rec is on here. They can do home and vehicle modifications if needed. Just a lot of additional great supports through this waiver. The next one that we'll talk about is CHIRP. So targeting criteria for this one, children under the age of 21. Again, we're looking at intensive medical behavioral needs, so much so that the child is at risk of out-of-home placement. And that's critical to point out at risk. It doesn't mean that they're forced into out-of-home placement yet, but they're on that trajectory. So before, this waiver used to be available for children in foster care, which children in foster care still could qualify for this waiver. However, I do like that they redefined it to say out of risk. So it's before they're placed into foster care that they can access this waiver. Again, there's no wait list for this waiver, so huge bonus there. Here are the supports that are available through the waiver. Habilitative, meaning if they need residential supports while they're going through treatment, that would fall under that. We have respite, community connector. That transition support really refers to the additional supports needed to transition either their housing placement, or if they're moving back home, or the supports that they need to be back at home or wherever they end up. It might not be a home placement ongoing. I like to point this out, and I know I mentioned this earlier, just the intake and enrollment process is intensive. The Medicaid waivers are state and federally funded, which you can imagine, a lot of accountability, a lot of paperwork that comes with any program that is state and federally funded. I won't go through the steps here. This is really just to illustrate that it's a multi-step process. Some of these steps can be done at the same time, depending on the family's level of participation. And the team that's supporting them through intake and enrollment knows that, so they'll walk the family through it. The one thing I tell every family that's going to go through intake and enrollment is that they need to participate as much as possible. So if your case manager reaches out and says, I need this form, don't take 2 months to get it done right away. Some of the processing time is not in our control. It's done by a county entity or a state entity, and it can take up to months to get processed. So we don't want to have the family wait months and then we wait months to process. So the more they participate, the faster it will go. I don't like to discourage families because it's a huge benefit to get through intake and enrollment. You're given tons of additional services and supports. So if they can hang in there, hang in for that roller coaster ride, and really just ride it out and participate as much as possible, they'll be just fine. But we want to keep their expectations realistic, that they won't just come in and get services tomorrow. And that's the last slide. So I know I whipped through that really fast. I could hear myself talking really quickly, but I wanted to be respectful of time and make sure that we have time for questions at the end. So I'll stop share. And I see I have a couple chats. I don't know if they're directed at me.
Thank you
Okay,
so
that
much,
last
Rachel.
one.
Yeah, that's great. A lot of great information. So there are a couple questions in the chat. So one question is there a list of common diagnoses somewhere that help when determining eligibility for programming at Developmental Pathways?
Gosh, there's a list for early intervention that I'm aware of. I am not aware of a list. It's hard. It would be hard to have a direct list for anything else. I would say anyone that you're working with, Meredith, that you have concerns about development, that might be a qualifying condition, and they can just give our intake a quick call. I'll pop intake into, actually, I'll just pop our website into the chat so that you can take a look, and they can reach out and just give us a quick call if you're like, hey, I've had people that are like, hey, my kiddo has ADD. I don't know if I qualify. And a neurological condition alone might not qualify, but if they've had testing done, they could potentially qualify. So I wouldn't discourage anyone, and I would be hesitant to say that I was the holder of all the eligibility information. So I know that's a really vague answer, but I would just say call if you have concerns.
Thank you. Another question was, Are developmental pathways programs tailored for refugee/immigrant populations?
Yes, I would say the short answer of that, yes, tailored is kind of I think that's a hard term, but anything that we do will be offered in the family's native language. So we have interpreters and translators that will work with any family. Now, I will say doing intake can be a little tricky, right? If you have the family call. So anyone can make a referral to developmental pathways. So what I would do is urge you to make the initial email or phone call and just say, I'm working with a family, they speak Amharic, they need an interpreter, here's their contact information. Because if the family calls, it can take us a while to find an interpreter to interpret the call, then give us a call back. It's much faster for you to make the call. We find the interpreter, we call the family. We're sensitive to a lot of needs. We know Aurora is an incredibly diverse place and that we want to support our families in Aurora. So we have a litany of contractors who speak another language, and we will always work to find whomever can speak that language. We've had some really rare ones that have come our way and that we've been able to accommodate, even if it means that we found the interpreter in New York. That's happened before. You know, we'll make it work. But it is a right for them to have services and everything in their native language.
Thank you so much. Any other thoughts or questions?
I have one, if that's okay. Thank you so much, Rachel. So the Alliance has been pretty involved with the social health information exchange development, which is basically connecting healthcare referrals to social service referrals to behavioral health, et cetera, et cetera. Have you been involved with any of the social health information exchange planning, or can we contact you offline? Because I think this is it seems like a huge need to make sure that these programs are also in the loop with that.
I'm not personally connected, but I will say Developmental Pathways is a fairly large organization. We have over 300 folks. So it wouldn't be unheard of that someone else is connected with that. I doubt if it goes beyond my community engagement team. And I would be happy for you to loop me in on those conversations and represent Developmental Pathways in that way, or just, IDD services in general.
Awesome. Yeah. We're always a web. We're like, okay, we need to make a connection. So I'm making a note of that. Thank you.
Perfect. I'll be there. No problem at all.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate it and the work you do. Lots going on. Thank you so much. All right, we will move on to our second speaker, Christina Amparan with the City of Aurora's Aurora Youth Violence Prevention Program. And thank you so much, Christina. Can we see your screen? You're
Yes,
good to go.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me today. Great presentation, a lot of really good resources. So I'm here to provide you an update of or an overview of our program. The Youth Violence Prevention Program aims to implement a public health approach to address youth violence within the City of Aurora. So my program falls under the City of Aurora's Housing and Community Services Department under the Community Engagement Division. This program came about back in 2020 when council and one of our deputy city managers were simultaneously working on a couple of different plans to address the increase in youth violence within the city. Councilmember Lawson and one of our, again, deputy city managers really dived into getting feedback from external stakeholders, internal stakeholders, and through the regional compact the city has with Denver to identify what the city could do to not just develop a plan, but offer funding and programming to the city. Funding was secured in 2020. Our program started in April of 2021. And since then, we've been working on developing overall structure and response to address the violent behavior happening within the city. This is the infrastructure of our program. So I serve as a manager. I have 2 coordinators and 3 outreach specialists, and I'll explain their the different roles here shortly. The program is essentially broken down into 4 different areas. The first one is ensuring that we're developing a collective response to address the violent behavior and move away from a siloed response, but also work collaboratively with our internal and external partners to ensure we're reducing possible duplication of efforts, that we're leveraging resources, but that also we're tapping into each other's expertise when it comes to how we can address the risk factors impacting youth. We do have a number of different work groups in place. So we have the regional compact with Denver, and I'll show you a list of others. But if there's an interest from any of you in being part of some of those work groups, please let me know. We're always looking to engage other partners. We also have half of our funding that's to go towards community organizations to provide direct services to at-risk and high-risk youth. This year we have $500,000 that we'll be releasing, with $400,000 of going towards intervention programming, and then $100,000 going towards prevention. What we have seen is that there's a tremendous need within the Aurora community to ensure that we have local providers within the city of Aurora to address the impacts that our families are experiencing. And so those funds are in place to help address some of those gaps. We have received over 30 applications from 21 organizations with an initial request of over $2 million. But again, we only have $500,000. So in a way, it does give me the information that I need to request a larger budget from our council for upcoming years. So where we're at with the funding is we will be getting final instructions from council on May 16th as far as who they have approved for us to fund. They have received a list of recommended programs to fund through a diverse group of panelists. Through the intervention response, I do have a team of outreach workers that are essentially serving as a similar role as a grid outreach worker. The outreach specialists on my team are providing individualized case management, mentorship, system navigation supports to at-risk and high-risk youth. So I can provide the criteria in the referral form for anyone, but essentially their role is to help them navigate the system, but also ensure that they're being connected to services and reduce risk factors and increase access to protective factors in order for us to see some level of behavioral change. So although they may have a supervising officer or case manager, the role of an outreach worker is key because they're providing that wraparound support and guidance that a lot of our families, especially those families that are first-time residents within our country, really require to ensure that they have that additional support to ensure not just what the expectation is, but what everyone's roles and how our systems work. So far, we have 14 cases that we are actively working with. We have 12 in engagement. And then we also have 9 that we have been able to refer out to other providers. So we do a lot of connections, similar to what Mandy said. We're always finding ways that we can connect providers to the right resource. And then prevention response. We work with our community mobilization team made up of community-based organizations, faith-based leaders to develop that prevention response at the larger community level to ensure that we're supporting public awareness campaigns, any type of programming that will help change the norm around violent behavior, but also offer continued community activations in our community so we can continue to increase awareness of services, resources, but also just build areas and opportunities for community to come together because we know that that's also part of that public health approach, is ensuring that we are offering some of those safe spaces and programming to our community. These are the different work groups that we do have in place. I mentioned the regional compact with Denver. That's made up of director level representatives and representatives from the mayor's office from both cities that are looking to find common terms, common data collection efforts, common program implementation, and common prioritization of what we want to look at as municipalities to address the violent behavior that's going back and forth between both cities. Our steering committee is made up of, again, leadership level reps, internal and external, and they provide me the guidance and support to move the program forward. Our intervention team is will be transitioning over to a multidisciplinary team this summer. That's who will review our caseload that we actively have in our referrals to ensure that we are working with human services, criminal justice partners, schools to ensure that we're identifying multiple system touch points and that we're working together to ensure the individual youth, but also the families being provided the best supports possible. The community mobilization team that I mentioned, and then we also have a youth advisory council that's been very successful over the last year. It's made up of currently 19 Aurora youth who are incentivized for their time and their volunteering and participate in a number of different activities to include trainings, youth outings, and they are taking the lead on service projects that they're hosting once a year to help address a specific risk factor impacting hotspots within the city of Aurora. As an example, for Q4 of 2021, they hosted a turkey drive at Hinckley, where they were able to provide turkey, canned food, diapers, a number of other resources to families. This past month, they were able to provide hygiene items to over 90 families from elementary schools within the Northwest community that are the most in need based on our partnership with the schools. And so they have been learning a ton of leadership skills. They've been creating their own support systems. Some are system involved, some are not. But it's the first time that a lot of these youth are being given the opportunity to get involved in civic engagement activities, to be exposed to locations they had never been to. We took them to the military base in Aurora. Some had never been in one of our libraries within the city. And so they were able to get a tour of our central library and get a library card. So things like that you take for granted, but for them, it's a tremendous experience to be able to get. Through that public health approach, we have completed a community needs assessment, which we use that information to help inform our strategic plan. That community needs assessment included individual groups and focus groups with over 60 individuals. It included the completion of the collection of over 600 surveys, with over 70% of those responses coming from youth. That really captured input around how is our city being impacted by youth violence? Where are our hotspots? Where is the community saying they feel unsafe? What are some of those behaviors? We also worked with our work groups to continue to help us develop the Aurora model and looked at national models and best practices, both at a local level and at the national level, to help inform our strategic plan. So through that public health approach, we will continue to implement our strategies, continue to assess and determine what's working, what's not working, and make modifications as needed. We are looking to implement or duplicate local programs that are being implemented in Denver to include their youth violence prevention programming offered through the public safety youth programs, such as the supports being provided to the runaway population, and then through GRID, which is now the Office of Community Violence Solutions. We're taking approaches from the comprehensive gang model, pure violence, and we're ensuring that our model is not just evidence-based, but it's also considerate of the diversity of our community, that it's strength-based, that it's trauma-informed, and that we're ensuring that we're taking the best approach that we can. I'm going to give you a quick sec to review this SWOT analysis, but this is essentially what we found through our assessment of the city in its efforts to address violent behavior. So as you can see, a strength is the level of commitment to support this moving forward. A weakness is that there has been very much a siloed response, and we do have a lot of opportunity, a lot of innovative approaches that we are looking to implement and ensure that we're moving away from being solely focused on a prevention approach or an intervention, but ensuring that we're implementing a balanced approach. This is what we saw as communities with the highest impact of overall youth violence, but also other risk factors within the city. And this includes suicide rates, it includes drug use, prostitution, a number of different risk factors impacting the community. This is a list of the top violent behaviors impacting Aurora youth, as well as other risk factors. And I always like to mention here, and as many of you know, that any given youth may be experiencing more than one of these violent behaviors or risk factors, which is why it's so critical for us to implement that collective collaborative response so we can refer out and address, you know, some of those basic needs that our youth have, and then start tackling some of these other risk factors to help them become stable and move them away from some of those high risk behaviors. Our strategic approach is broken down into these 5 different strategic areas. So the first one is program development, ensuring that we're developing a multi-year, multi-level, multi-sector response. And multi-year is really important because we know that we can implement short-term strategy, but in order for us to have that true impact and reduction of violent behavior and other risk factors, it's going to take a couple, it's going to take time. And so ensuring that we're increasing understanding around why that is, but that we're implementing short and long-term programming. Organizational change through our work groups and our network, really looking at how do we change some of those policies or current procedures? How do we remove some of those barriers that our families are experiencing to ensure that they're accessing some of the programming that they need? Serving the reentry population, at-risk population, but also the secondary prevention. We know that, for example, many youth right now within the city are being reported as runaways, and that's usually a population that we haven't paid attention as much because they're not labeled as gang members yet, but they're the ones being exposed to some of that violent behavior or recruited. And so how do we ensure that we're not just serving those youth that may already currently be involved in some of that violent behavior, but are actively being recruited into those behaviors? And then again, that prevention strategy. How do we address those highest impacted communities to ensure that we're bettering the quality of life for those individuals, and we're changing those norms around violent behavior. So the one goal I would say that I would ask you all to take away is that we are serving youth 10 to 24. If you do have any youth that are experiencing some at-risk behavior or high-risk behavior, this is our criteria. Feel free to reach out to us and we can determine whether we can assign the case to an outreach specialist or if we can refer it out to one of our partner agencies. Our outreach specialists have been doing really good work. We have seen some level of behavioral change in our youth, but we have also recognized that there's some relapse in some of our youth, and so ensuring that we have those continued supports for them. Any questions? And I know I rushed, but I just wanted to make sure I left enough time for questions.
Thank you, Christina. I did receive a couple of questions. One was, with the structural changes happening with the public health department, how is the city approaching coordinating with the health departments that will emerge in the coming months?
So that will, one of the major supports that we have received from Tri-County has been around data collection efforts. They were the ones that completed the survey and also partnered with us on funding specific prevention level efforts. And so just ensuring that we're transferring some of those supports over to the new health departments that come about.
Thank you. And then another question, is the city coordinating with the city of Denver for efforts along Colfax?
Yes, so that's through our regional compact, but Colfax is one. It's not the major focus because we know that is a hot spot, but we know that a lot of the we know that we have to take a larger scale approach, and so we are partnering pretty closely to address how we're responding to not just the Colfax corridor, but overall violent behavior crossing between both municipalities.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and for the work you're doing. And please come back and update us on how things are going in a future kids interest group meeting. Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you so much, Rachel and Christina, for your presentations. We will send out the slide decks to you all after and within the next few days. And thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day.